Thank you for joining us again and welcome back to our channel. If you are joining us for the first time, we appreciate your time. Listen folks, geopolitics is a brutal game. In this episode, I really want to dive into the reason why the divide and rule aspect being used in geopolitics is a classic game being used by colonizers in centuries ago. But listen, I just want to look into what I call the mixed signal. Africa should pay attention on what's happening, because in this channel we talk about how the continent should focus on important strategic policies that are happening in Beijing, in Moscow, in Washington DC, in Brussels, including in Ankara, in other countries across the Middle East, and more importantly in Delhi and across the region. Why am I saying this? In this episode, I really want to look at how France is using the classic divide and rule approach, and more importantly the mixed signal options. Listen, if you pay attention, most recently the president of France, Emmanuel Macron, came out and talked about the reason why France's troops are being withdrawn across the region, particularly in Senegal, is as a result of France's engagement and agreement regards to the government in Senegal. But the Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko, came out and lashed out to regards to that particular comment used by the French leader. It is a classic example of geopolitics of divide and rule by Emmanuel Macron, the president of France, coming out and making that statement at the ambassadors meeting that he had recently. It will send a signal to the people of the country of Senegal that the leaders also are talking about that they have made this decision by themselves. No, it's not like that. It's as a result of us, France, decided to do that. But by the president saying that particular comment, it projects an element of power and to give a global image of France. Again, by the Prime Minister of Senegal coming out and debunking that particular comment, it goes a long way to tell the continent of Africa and Africa's geopolitical partners that the continent has come of age. Most recently, the president of France played the same game with the country of Ukraine. Let me give you an example. A couple of months ago, President Emmanuel Macron came out clear and said that France would not rule out even sending troops to the country of Ukraine. What does that send the signal? It sent a signal of strength, sent a signal of that France is ready to go to war if it's necessary, or France is ready to make significant contribution in situations like that. But just past couple of days, 6 days ago, in the ambassador's speech, the president again came out. President Emmanuel Macron said that Ukraine should start reviewing its territorial integrity. It's to start looking at territorial options. I don't understand what that means in geopolitics. The only way I can interpret this is sending the mixed signal I'm talking about, is to project that France is powerful and at the same time looking at the global option. He's saying now that the world is shifting towards looking at an amicable peace, an extent. So this confusing signal, I think Africa should learn to read this. I call it mixed signal in geopolitics, which is very dangerous, and I think that others will say it's a divide and rule. But the Prime Minister of Senegal, Mr. Sonko, came out and corrected the president of France that these particular mixed signal communications were things that were happening in the colonial days, that is not going to happen now. It is important that such communications comes out and be debunked ASAP to give the people and the global political class to understand that these countries are making these choices as a result of their independent sovereignty. They've made this decision that we do not want France's troops to be in this country, and as a result of that, we have sent that communication out. By France coming out claiming that it's as a result of their arrangement, I think that's total dishonesty for the leadership in Paris to come and say out that clear. But again, without any much delay, let's roll the clip from Mr. Sonko on how he, from his own perspective, talked about why Senegal made this particular decision.
It's a stinging rejection after Emmanuel Macron's comments on Monday.
Monsieur le Premier ministre.
According to the French president, the withdrawal of French soldiers from Senegal at the end of last year was the subject of negotiations between Paris and Dakar, an assertion that Ousmane Sonko, Senegal's prime minister, disputes.
President Emmanuel Macron believes that it was simply out of convenience and politeness that France gave the African countries the first opportunity to make the announcement. No discussion or negotiation has taken place to date, and the decision taken by Senegal stems from its sole will as a free, independent and sovereign country.
Ousmane Sonko also lashed out at another comment by Emmanuel Macron, when the latter lamented that African countries had apparently forgotten to thank France for its decade-long deployment to fight an Islamist insurgency in the Sahel. The Senegalese Prime Minister responded that France had neither the capacity nor the legitimacy to ensure Africa's security and sovereignty, and had, on the contrary, often contributed to destabilizing certain countries. The French president's remarks have not gone down well in Chad either, which also ousted the French army last month.
The government of the Republic of Chad expresses its deep concern following the remarks made recently by the President of the French Republic, Emmanuel Macron, which reflects a contemptuous attitude towards Africa and Africans.
The two African countries also criticised France's colonial heritage in a diplomatic crisis that's likely to further damage France's image in Africa.
Again, first, I want to thank you all for the 40,000 subscribers. I can't do that alone. It's as a result of your commitment and your appreciation and your support for the channel. With 40,000 subscribers, we're going to go hard into work to make sure that we continue to enlighten or strengthen your geopolitical knowledge on how the continent of Africa interacts with its global partners. Based on this global interaction with Africa and its geopolitical partners, it is clear this one word that keeps coming out: sovereignty. Sovereignty over and over. Why is this important? Well, if you remember that most recently the country of Ivory Coast came out clear and asked France that we are tired of doing business together in the terms of the strategic engagement area. We want to focus on our sovereignty. Sovereignty, you will continue to hear this because these countries know internally that they were not free, but it was difficult for them to come and speak out. As a result of this, all of these nations, I believe, they were waiting for the right moment to come out and speak out their mind in a way that France cannot imagine that its sphere of influence is disintegrating to this extent. So let's roll the clip with Beverly Ojang, an analyst in the continent of Africa, who perceive this as sovereignty being the key with regards to why these nations are making this very important and monumental choice in their history. Let's roll the clip.
The language used by leaders in a lot of these countries talks about the need to reclaim sovereignty, and there has seemed to be quite a bit of anger towards France in recent years. There are people who say France has a sort of neo-colonialist approach when it comes to lots of these countries. France has lots of business operations still in parts of West Africa. Do you think that those accusations of France having a kind of neo-colonial business attitude really stack up today?
I mean, if you look at the wave of anti-French sentiment, it does stem from such a perception, and also the way that sometimes France has responded to some of the accusations against it. There have been tense statements between the Sahel and Macron's government in particular, which has prevailed those perceptions, but also a feeling that governments are perceived to be influenced by France. So Cote d'Ivoire's announcement is a way of just forestalling that. With Senegal, it's been a nationalist policy being promoted since Sonko and Faye came into power. And in Chad, it's both that, but also seeking newer partners such as the UAE or even Turkey or Hungary or Russia in the region. So it's a broad mix of these things, but long-term resentment is what has partly led to the quick drawdown of French forces, particularly in the Sahel, but also thinking around what nationalism means when countries are attaining sovereignty.
Beverly Ocheng, there's lots more I'd like to ask you, and unfortunately we are out of time. Thank you very much.
Ivory Coast is one of those nations in the continent of Africa that you will say that they were so cozy with France. But by Mr. Ouattara coming out and saying it pretty clear that we really want to do things on our own, we now believe on our armed forces, they are able to handle the challenges and protect the national territory. It is relevant, it's important. Well, Senegal also reviewing all of these options think that it is an important aspect talking about the sovereignty of this nation. So the sovereignty aspect is a very important thing going on, because why these countries are saying it, over these past centuries, these countries haven't been free regarding their relationship. They really want to break away from these particular issues. That's the reason why the aspect of sovereignty is not going anywhere soon. We only talk about that these nations have asked France to leave, or the United States of America left Niger. It is not a wrong thing to do. They just really wanted to have space on their own to make more economic choices, make more engagements that are relevant, and it's a win-win situation.
First, it has been dubbed Frexit, but unlike the original Brexit, this is not an exit that France chose. This week, in his New Year's address, President Alassane Ouattara of Ivory Coast announced that French soldiers would be leaving the country for good. In November, Senegal and Chad both declared that the former colonial power was out, marking a significant shrinking in France's military footprint in Africa. And this follows similar decisions previously by Mali, Burkina Faso and Niger. So what impact will this have on West and Central Africa in the year ahead? To discuss, I'm very pleased now to be joined on the programme by Beverly Ocheng. She's a senior analyst on Francophone Africa at Control Risks, and she joins us now from Dakar, the capital of Senegal. Good evening to you, and thanks for speaking to us.
Thank you for having me on the programme.
First of all, on the decision then by Ivory Coast, was that announcement by President Ouattara expected?
No, actually it wasn't. And it's significant because Ivory Coast is going into an election this year. And although Ouattara, the current president, has not said if he will vie, he is a strong contender. But there have been perceptions over the years that his government, because of its proximity with Paris, is being influenced by France. And we've even seen the recent accusations by the military leaders of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. They have said that Ivory Coast is allegedly being used as a rare base by France to destabilize the Sahel. Now, sentiments like these are likely to be hijacked by anti-Western groups that have been growing in the region, even pro-Russia propagandists, and this may be used to undermine the Ivorian election. But by announcing the withdrawal of French forces, Ouattara is deterring that opportunistic sort of movement to try stirring anti-French sentiment in Cote d'Ivoire, which hasn't happened in the past, but also demonstrating that he is confident in the national army, which has been forestalling quite successfully over the years the insurgency from the Sahel. So this wins him political points in an election year, and also makes it seem like he is taking ownership over the decision for French forces to leave, rather than it coming from France.
Right, and that decision by President Ouattara follows similar ones at the end of last year in Senegal and in Chad.
We are talking about France's presence in the country of Senegal for so many years. Let me look at the trade figures. China recently came into the continent of Africa to engage the continent from a different angle. And that is important. This is what Africa need at the moment. Look at the trade figures between the country of Senegal and China. And if you compare the trade between China and Senegal and that of France and Senegal in terms of export number, looking at 2022, it is clear, the figures don't lie. China beat France hands down. There is no question about it. If you look at the trade figures in millions of dollars, in billions of US dollars, in terms of export, in terms of strategic engagement in trade, how is this possible for a colonial nation that has been in that country for a long time, and someone else comes in and begin to trade and also surpasses your particular engagement? It is an indication that African nations have beginning to realize that it's not business as usual. They want to grow. They want to engage with other strategic partners across the region, and they want to look at new partners that bring in new opportunity. And the recent government in the country of Senegal have decided to spread its economic tentacles to bring in businesses and companies that will work on a win-win situation. So the trade figures is not something new. It is absolutely clear that China threat in the continent of Africa economically has woken up France, and France took this region for granted over the centuries. And that is the reason why this withdrawal, this communication to leave these nations is not just as a result of saying that the military to leave. Just tell me how difficult it is, how challenging it is that a country's foreign military staying in your nation. Do you know how difficult that is in making your strategic choices? Do you know how difficult that can impair your global perspective in terms of your engagement? For example, purchasing military equipment, you won't have a foreign force in your country, and then where you are in a partnership and engagement with them, you will decide to buy the same equipment that you would have bought from the existing partner that you have in your countries. These countries want to have a diversified relationship, and France is not comfortable with that. So this is where the problem lies. They want to buy different equipment from other nations. Maybe the France's equipment are very expensive and they want to do business with China. Maybe it's cheaper. Maybe the European Union nations, some of them provide cheaper equipment and France skyrockets the price. But they want to diversify. But you can do that if you have a foreign military in your own country. So it's important for these nations to come out each time their geopolitical partner says something which is contrary to the arrangement in the background. They should debunk them. We've seen that in geopolitical circles where the conversation behind, if it is revealed, it will be debunked by the other geopolitical partner. So this is not new of Africa. So by Mr. Sonko coming out clear and pointing out that it was as a result of the sovereignty of the country of Senegal, not by the will or the goodwill of France. I think that is an important communication in this day and age. It sends a signal that these nations have arrived, and it's important for us to continue to see such approaches. It's so nice that clear communications is coming out and we know where each country stands. If you're able to tell your geopolitical partners where you stand, they will respect you. They will continue to respect you. But if you are all over the place, it sends a mixed signal and they do not know where to engage you and where to re-strategize their relationship with you. I want to thank you for watching. Leave us a comment. Let us know what you think with regards to the communication from Paris. If that was a strategy by France to project some element of power and also go ahead with the mixed signal that I've been talking about. I will be looking forward to meeting you in our next episode. Thanks for watching and have a pleasant day. Bye-bye.